All right. Well, oh God, we're being interrogated, Peter. We're under the interrogation lights of Guantanamo Bay, I always think. Look, I'm Clive Stafford Smith, and this, as you well know, is Peter Hain. I just need to remember to thank Lindsay and Martin Bowdry for sponsoring this event. Let's have a little round of applause. And then it falls upon me to interrogate Peter. How often do you get cross-examined, Peter? Since your
Far too often.
Two criminal trials, which I want to hear about. Yeah. Anyway, Peter, look, what I thought we'd do, I have read his book. I hope you all are going to buy it afterwards and go to the back and have him sign it. But so much of it is actually intensely relevant, I think, Peter, to the era we find ourselves in. And as you all know about Peter, his history of anti-apartheid work, I want to just go through a bunch of that, if I may. But let's just start with, you all read yesterday about F.W. de Klerk's death. And that sort of makes it particularly topical. Not everyone's read your independent article on this, Peter. What do you make of de Klerk and his role in South Africa's semi-liberation?
Well, first of all, thank you to the Bridport Festival for inviting me. And we spent very happy holidays in Burton Bradstock, just down the road in the 1960s, late 60s, when we came into exile from Pretoria, and so loved that area. And my younger sister Gian's here, she'll remember it too. So it's nice to be back.
And they're going on a tour of Burton Bradstock to get some fun memories.
But not under the cliff.
I gave him the same warning as the Bridport News.
Some of my political opponents might wish I would.
They'll be on top, just sort of shaking it. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
F.W. de Klerk was, of course, the president of South Africa who came to power just at a crucial moment in history and released Nelson Mandela, unbanned his African National Congress, and negotiated a transition to a non-racial democracy. So for that, he deserves credit. And he was a complicated character, though, because for 20 years, he was in the apartheid government, enforcing the system, not just the laws, which covered everything from sex to sport, the most labyrinthine, complex, forensic system of institutionalized racism the world's ever seen. So he was part of the top command. And there was nothing in his background which would have suggested that he had that he was going to do what he did. And in that sense, I compare him, Clive, to a Gorbachev-type figure who has to be within the system. You can't envisage how the change could have happened any other way. And he did it because the place was becoming ungovernable. The resistance had turned South Africa into an ungovernable place, and they were worried about civil war. The intelligence services had came to him and said, "We're worried about this place falling apart." The economy was tanking, and he decided, actually, change had to happen. The business community, which for decades had profited from apartheid, said the game was up. So he deserves credit for that, but I just want to make one other point about him. In the 4 years between Nelson Mandela's release in February 1990, and you'll remember him walking from the Cape Winelands to freedom, for the first time in 10,000 days of his life, which he spent in prison. In the 4 years between then and him being elected president in April 1994, more people were killed by the apartheid state than at any other time under the 4 decades of apartheid. And de Klerk was the head of the system. He always denied knowledge. But they were trying to kind of murder Mandela's followers as well as negotiating with him.
Because, in the papers over the last couple of days, there's been certain allegations against the Prime Minister of Australia and his reputation for probity. And I was curious, reading your book about de Klerk, did he go through the Truth and Reconciliation process?
He sort of did, but not fully. And he always denied any knowledge of any atrocities, even though the evidence was against that. But in his, I don't know if any of you saw a clip from his video released posthumously after he died. He was dying of cancer for quite a while.
And he left a video, didn't he?
He left a video in which he apologized for apartheid, which he'd never done before, and apologized for the atrocities committed in its name. So that's a good thing, but before that, he wouldn't do it on the record. He was repeatedly asked to do so and wouldn't do it.
What I thought we might do, Peter, is start with your youth in South Africa. But in the end, what I want to do, there's an awful lot of things you write about in the book that are very, very relevant to where we are today. So I'm not going to ask you only about your emotional things. And, you know, Peter does make certain comments about British people who went to private school, of which one of them is me. And so I get to ask him about his emotions. We who went to boarding school have none. Tell me about some of the stories when you were young. It must have been extraordinary. Your mum and dad were great opponents of apartheid and were banned, and it was so interesting to read about them being banned. And then you were like 14, 15, being sent out as their proxy to do various things. Tell them a couple of stories about that, and then tell me what that was like for a kid your age then.
Well, we were very lucky to have what I regard as the best parents in the world. I'm sorry, I'm getting a bit emotional, actually. I wasn't expecting to do that. So who were, on the one hand, fantastic parents, but on the other hand, these semi-clandestine anti-apartheid activists. So we had special branch raiding our house all the time, parked at the bottom of the drive, following us wherever we went. My mother was banned in 1963. She was the chief political activist. My dad was an architect. He was at work most of the time.
When he could get work, he couldn't get some after
then they stopped him working. But there were many, many clauses in the banning order, one of which restricting you in all sorts of ways, designed to turn you into a non-person. One of which was you could not communicate with another banned person. So when they banned my dad a year after they'd banned my mum, this presented the government with a dilemma they'd never faced before.
Had a little footnote to let married couples talk to each other.
So they had to be given special permission in their banning orders to talk to one other banned person on the planet, namely their other half, for which, as you can imagine, they were very grateful. Now, one of the other clauses in the banning order was that you couldn't be in the presence of more than one other person at a time. So you asked about my role. So we used to hold these diplomatic parties for ambassadors to meet black activists in our living room. When my mum was banned, she couldn't attend that. So she sat next door in the kitchen, and my job was to take the American ambassador, the British ambassador, the rest of them, German and the rest of them, one by one in to see her. Because if she'd stepped next door into the living room, she'd have been arrested, because they had informers everywhere, breaking the terms of her banning order. But she could see them one by one in the kitchen next door.
And they were arrested from time to time, weren't they, your mum and dad?
Yeah, my mum and dad were arrested before they were banned and detained for 14 days. They were planning to dish out leaflets supporting Nelson Mandela's call on black workers to stay at home in protest against apartheid. This was in 1960. And my mum and dad went into a black township, which these are the areas surrounding the white cities, and they were the kind of workers for white cities. She took this leaflet, draft leaflet, to talk to activists in the township about, and they were arrested. And she chewed the leaflet up and spat it out. And if she hadn't done that, I don't know what it tasted like, but if she hadn't done that, they would have had the evidence to convict her and put them in prison for a long time.
He's going to have lunch over in Burton Bradstock or whatever. We've asked for a special meal of sort of mushed up paper for you, yeah. You would have been about 12 then. Did you go to see them in prison or not?
No, we were never allowed to do that. It was a bit scary because, we didn't know whether they were going to come out. But they did, because there was no evidence they could hold. In those days, you could only hold them in that without charge, you'll understand as a lawyer, without charge for 12 days, and then there were additional 2 days, making 2 weeks. It subsequently became 90 days. then 180 days, and then indefinite detention.
Which,
yeah.
Certainly rings true with me. It's true of Guantanamo, my Caribbean resort of choice, where you can be held forever without trial. And that was there. There was another thing you write about this guy Harris, who was a liberal. It was the Liberal Party, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Your parents
the Liberal Party was the only legal anti-apartheid group then. They'd banned Mandela's ANC, the Pan-Africanist Congress, the Congress of Democrats, was the only anti-apartheid group that was allowed to be active until later on it was banned as well.
And was the Liberal Party just a white party, or was it...
No, non-racial.
Right.
So I remember a black activist coming to a meeting in our house once, and he said, "This is the first time I've ever come through the front door of a white man's house."
It is extraordinary, isn't it? I had some cousins from what they referred to as Rhodesia, and they came to stay with us in the 60s in England, and the things they would say. And they just sort of assumed that we would agree with them on that. It must have been extraordinary to be in school as you, was it?
Yeah, it was, although we were quite fortunate in that most of the teachers who dealt with me were not hostile. They were not kind of supportive of my parents, but they were not hostile, so we were lucky in that respect. But John Harris was a friend of our family. I remember him visiting the house as kids. He was a Liberal Party activist. He was actually chair of the South African Non-Racial Olympic Committee, which was a sports body by definition, trying to get a non-racial team to represent the country in the Olympics, and without that, to get South Africa expelled from the Olympics. For that, he was banned, and he became increasingly desperate about the predicament. Mandela and the ANC leadership had been locked up on Robben Island then for a couple of years. The whole leadership was being oppressed. The resistance had been crushed. And John Harris became increasingly frustrated, as did other white liberals and radicals of various kinds, and decided to join an organization called the African Resistance Movement, which was committed to sabotage, not to killing people, but to sabotaging government installations.
So ARM was armed, was it?
Pardon?
ARM was armed.
Yeah, African ARM, African Resistance Movement. My parents were opposed to it for various reasons, one of them being they didn't think it would be effective, and they thought the state would it would invite further repression. But, and they argued with John and another friend, Hugh Lewin, who was recruited on those grounds. But anyway, John Harris planted a bomb on Johannesburg railway station in 1964, and I think it was July 1964. And he telephoned a 15-minute warning to the police, all of which was recorded at his trial, by the way, that happened, and to 3 newspapers saying, "Clear the concourse." He clearly intended it as a spectacular demonstration of resistance against apartheid, with the resistance closed down.
But without killing anybody.
Without killing anybody. It was, as I explain in the book, it was subsequently revealed that the information went all the way up through the head of police and security to the police minister, the Minister of Justice, as he was termed.
Who was
he
that?
Was labelled. There was John Foster, who subsequently became Prime Minister. And they deliberately decided to ignore it, to let the bomb go off. And it killed an old woman, a grandmother, maimed her daughter, and injured a lot of people. He was arrested and put on trial and executed and hung from the neck.
There's a story before you get to that, and it's a curious one about this guy Lloyd snitching on him, right?
Yeah.
I'm curious about that. Tell him, how did that go about? Because you were going to the trial some of the time, weren't you?
No, I didn't ever go to the trial. I was at school at the time.
Oh, that's right. It came around.
My mum and dad, as banned people, couldn't go to his trial
in
1964 because banned people were not allowed to go into courts. So,
except presumably when we put him on trial, and then they could go into courts. That's the only way, huh?
If they'd been on trial themselves, yes. Yes, because of course John Harris was banned, but he could go to his own trial, but not to anybody else's. So one of his best friends, in fact, a fellow conspirator for that particular bomb incident, and they'd planned others, was a guy called John Lloyd, who was the key state witness against him. and was crucial to his execution because he gave evidence that it was premeditated murder, even though he knew that Harris had intended it as a demonstration. Otherwise, he wouldn't have telephoned the warning.
And did you know him at that point too?
No, I didn't. My parents knew him well, John Lloyd. So he was the key witness that got John Harris hung. And the worst thing about that, for me, is that he never retracted the evidence. He was allowed safe passage to England, having given this evidence against two of his close friends and two of his close conspirators. And he was then approached 3 times, once by John Harris's lawyer, who flew specially, and 2 other people flew specially to London, to retract his premeditated murder evidence. I mean, he'd planned the thing with John, which he wouldn't do.
And by that point, he was here in Britain.
He was here in Britain, yeah.
And there were, you'd mentioned at one point a little incident later in life when you were invited. He was in Exeter, not far from here.
He moved to Exeter, where he
away.
set up as a solicitor.
And then you went down there at an anti-apartheid talk later when you were in Britain. Tell them about that. It's extraordinary.
Well, this was the 1980s. And there was a meeting in Exeter, and I was asked to speak, as I was doing all over the country at that kind of time. And I arrived not knowing who was chairing the meeting, and it turned out to be John Lloyd, which was pretty kind of arresting moment. And I decided not to make a protest or anything because the audience wouldn't have understood. And I found out afterwards that he'd presented himself as an anti-apartheid hero, not explaining what had actually happened. There was another close friend of Hugh Lewin's, in fact, a best man at his wedding, Adrian Leftwich, who also gave evidence, but then went to teach in York University and never concealed his role as effectively a traitorous role. But John Lloyd then was selected to stand for Labour in the 1997 election, and he would have won because Ben Bradshaw, who's still the Labour MP, did win. But his true story was then revealed a couple of years beforehand, and he was deselected. Quite a messy.
And your parents couldn't obviously go to the funeral of their colleague who had been hanged, but I think you were sent as the proxy.
No, my mum and dad were allowed to go, exceptionally as banned people, because normally they weren't allowed to attend social gatherings. And lots of people went to, and you were not allowed to have mixed funerals. Everything was segregated in South Africa, but this one was allowed. And there were special branch officers at the door who were taking the names of everybody going in. And they think that's why they allowed this event to happen.
Right.
But they wouldn't allow my dad, who had composed with John's wife Anne the funeral address, the order of hymns and songs, and We Shall Overcome and things like that. And John Donne's No Man is an Island, and there were various other readings. And so the night before, they refused my dad permission to read it. There was nobody else to do it, so I kind of volunteered to do it as a 15-year-old, which I must say was pretty scary because I'd never spoken on a public platform before. I'd never been in a school play. In fact, I hated the idea of being in a school.
I prepared you to become a politician, don't worry about it. But it must have been extraordinarily emotional for you to have to do that.
It was. The most emotional thing was I hadn't been warned, but I knew I had to do it. I hadn't been told when, that I had to press the button to send it was in a crematorium, to send the body to be cremated. So I didn't know at what point in these proceedings I was supposed to do it. So it wasn't a eulogy. It's often written about as a eulogy. It was simply reading out and the series of things. And then when there was a song to be sung, like We Shall Overcome, which was sung with great gusto, you'll remember Joan Baez and others immortalized the song in the American civil rights protests. That it was really to kind of be the MC, as it were, and do the certain readings.
Could kids get banned too? 15-year-olds.
I don't know of any recorded kids being banned. Thousands were banned, mostly black. Black teenagers, however, were put on trial and sent to Robben Island. There was one celebrated case with an interesting twist to it. My mum used to go to these courts to support the kids because their parents didn't know what had happened to them. They just disappeared. They were protesting against apartheid. There was this one young guy who was 15 years old in short pants, and she used to take him soup and a bar of chocolate every day. Anyway, he was sentenced to 10 years on Robben Island for protesting against apartheid peacefully. And it turned out, and none of us knew this till 2012, not my mum nor him, that he descended to be Deputy Chief Justice of South Africa in the Constitutional Court, which is incredible. It is part of an incredible new constitution, probably the finest in the world, which Britain could learn from, actually, since we don't have a constitution.
No, we're definitely going to get to that. Trust me. No.
So that was a remarkable
I know you're
thing.
an ally on that. We're going to talk about that.
So when I discovered who he was, Dikgang Musineke, and I took him a bar of chocolate from my mum.
No, it's interesting because I've got some clients in Saudi Arabia who are kids, juveniles, who were actually sentenced to death for protesting against the regime there, which is somewhat akin to what you were dealing with. But with young black kids, did any of them face the noose?
Yeah, hundreds of black people were killed. There were over 100 black political activists killed. I don't know what age they all were, but I wouldn't be surprised if some of them were teenagers.
As we were talking before about the Bridport dagger, this is the place that we made the nooses for Britain. I just want you to feel a teeny bit guilty.
I didn't know that, actually.
Yeah, we're going to expiate the guilt of Bridport on this. Before we move on to you going, when your family went to Britain, I just wanted to ask you about Worcester, because some of the things you write about the sort of rise of, what is intensely right-wing, what's loosely labeled fascism sometimes, does resonate today. Do you see in Britain any of the sort of attitudes that, perhaps on a slightly different level, that you saw back then in South Africa?
I mean, apartheid was such a unique system.
Somewhat. I mean, you got, Israel is not so fantastic.
Well,
different.
yeah, I mean, Israel's treatment of the Palestinians is extremely oppressive. But you have a society there in Palestine and Israel which is basically divided down the middle between Palestinians and Israelis. Some of the Palestinians, some of the Arab Israelis being actually within Israel. So it's more of a half and half situation. South Africa was 10% of the population oppressing 90%. But where I think there is, and Foster, by the way, was interned during the Second World War for pro-Nazi activities. So there was that kind of commonality, because you get pro-Nazis in Britain today, unbelievably.
Can I tell you, this is dreadful, maybe I shouldn't say it, but I'm going to anyhow. I was interested reading recently about one of the architects of Brexit, who you will know well, who was at Dulwich College, and Mr. Farage. And at one point he was up for being a prefect, and one of the teachers objected and said, well, he's a member of the Nazi Party. And the other teacher said, well, that's no reason not to make him a prefect. And it sort of made me think of Worcester. But anyway.
Where your question does resonate is the rise of the alt-right, the American term for the far right. And we have a far right in Britain, and the far right has kind of got a voice that even in Oswald Mosley's day in the black shirts, it didn't really have, and a kind of resonance with people who feel left behind by deindustrialization. Many of them would have been trade unionists and labor voters in past decades, and that's been true in America as well. Trumpism is a feature of that. So I think there are some connections, but I wouldn't stretch them too far.
No, you don't. But on the other hand, it is always interesting. The more the moderate right tries to take over the role of the far right, and at the other end of the spectrum, the more it sort of
the more you feed the beast.
You do.
The more you feed the beast, the more the beast wants.
Yeah.
And by the way, that's my view about Brexit, but that's another story entirely.
Totally. We'll have to massively agree on that as well. There came a point when your mum and dad and the rest of your family got kicked out of South Africa, which is a fairly extraordinary thing to do to anyone who was born and raised in a country. And you tell some interesting stories in the book about your mum sneaking you to the boat to get you on it. And one thing I can't forgive you for, which is you and your brother wanted to go to support Chelsea. I mean, that's disgusting.
Yeah, but understand. I don't apologise for that too. Chelsea's the best football team in the world. But
I'm a tractor boy.
But we Tom and I, who was going to be here today, but had a car crash last night. Unfortunately, he's okay. He and I looked at this map of London, and a friend was putting us up in his place in Putney, and we didn't know anything about London. And the two clubs most near to us were Fulham and Chelsea. We decided, we knew about Chelsea, and we'd been listening to it on the World Service on a Saturday afternoon. So we became Chelsea supporters from Pretoria.
Well, we're allowed one boo. I mean, come on, I think we can have that. I mean, we're not doing much to Peter, but that one is clearly. But actually, it was a really interesting story.
They didn't tell me you were going to heckle me about football when I agreed to do this.
No, of course not. In terms of being thrown out of your own country, that's an extraordinary thing to happen. Tell us a bit about that and how that felt apart from the disgusting choice with Chelsea.
Well, it felt pretty horrible because, we didn't want to leave. Joanne will remember. We didn't want to leave as kids. My mum and dad didn't want to leave. They thought they were betraying their comrades in the struggle. But they'd stopped my dad working as an architect. He designed hospital laboratories, and he was much in demand. But first of all, they stopped any firm from Pretoria city from employing him. Then he went freelance on his own and still got work from them. And then the special branch found out about that and stopped them providing him with work. Then he was offered a job outside Pretoria, but because the banning order restricted him to the municipal area of the city of Pretoria, he was not allowed to leave to do work. So basically, the income dried up. And that's the reason we had to come into exile in London. And, at one level it was quite exciting going on the ocean liner. We left on a train from Pretoria down to Cape Town, an overnight train, and it was quite exciting for kids. And the special branch watched us from the train to go to the docks to board the ocean liner, which was the cheapest way to travel for a family in those days in 1966. Then we came to London. Grey, drizzly London. And I remember arriving and thinking, goodness me, what are we letting ourselves in for? So it was pretty traumatic, I think, particularly for mum and dad, and probably for my younger brother and sisters. Well, I think it was more traumatic for them, because I just got involved in politics. And,
before that, you got into the World Cup final in 1966.
Oh, yeah, I did, yeah. I went to see the World Cup final because we bought cheap tickets, tourist tickets in Pretoria. Yeah. And then we watched all the semi-finals, quarter-finals. They got a kind of collection of tickets. And then I entered a draw for the World Cup final and managed to get a ticket. God. Stood next to a Spurs supporter.
I can't forgive you that either.
Who do you support then?
Ipswich Town, the tractor boys. Yeah. Well, and also the Bridport Bees, obviously. Come on, let's be honest. Look, there's so much in the book I'd love to go into, but actually we want to open it up to some questions in due course, so let's just jump a bit. I'd like to talk a bit about, leaping over how you became the activist you did on anti-apartheid. I think there were some very interesting things that you did in that, particularly with the notion of focusing on sport, because that's pretty extreme for, you stopping people from watching cricket, watching rugby, who knows? I don't care if you stop them watching Chelsea. You think about that, and I dare say there are people who are uncomfortable today with the whole idea of Insulate Britain blocking the roads, because it's annoying to some people. But when you're protesting, you've got to do it in a way that catches attention. Yeah. Yep. So tell us a bit about what led you to focus on sport and some of the ramifications of that.
Well, I think there's a picture about to appear of me being carried off there you are in the dark glasses, at Bristol Tennis Court in July 1969.
We all had bad clothes in 1969, didn't we?
And rather longer, darker hair.
Oh, the hair, I tell you.
There were several... First of all, I was sports mad, as most
you
South
were a
African
cricketer,
boys.
which is something I love about you, Peter.
Thank you. Not as good as you, Clive, but he still plays cricket, by the way, at his advanced age.
Yes, 23.
My dad played till he was 80, cricket. So I was a cricket fan. I was I'm not so much of a fan of rugby, but passionate about football, or soccer as it's called. And I got involved in the anti-apartheid movement following my mum and dad at the age of 17, 18 in London. And so it was the combination of sport and realizing how important sport was to white South Africans, because although in political terms and cultural terms, you know, South Africa's apartheid government and system they were the pariahs of the world, really, or the pariah of the world. They were welcomed, the Springboks were welcomed at Twickenham. The cricket team was welcomed at Lord's, feted, given lavish hospitality, you know, part of the international fraternity of sports teams. And I knew that if we stopped them playing, it would have a decisive effect. And this was a period when I was becoming increasingly interested in politics and involved with radical direct action, student sit-ins in the late 60s, the Paris student revolt of 1968. I can see some grey beards here like me, and you'll remember that period. And I applied the direct action, the non-violent direct action tactics prevalent then, squatting empty properties to support homeless families and so on, to the sports arena. It had never been done before. And it made me a hate figure, turned me into public enemy number one in South Africa, which is what they called me, hence the subtitle of the book. But I knew it could have a dramatic effect. And the other thing that interested me was most people in the anti-apartheid movement at that stage said, why are you concentrating on sport? You know, it's the economy, stupid. Of course it was. And the arms trade, of course it was. But it was much easier to do something about sport and win a tangible victory at a time when the resistance inside the country had been smashed. The international anti-apartheid campaign was a very minority movement. People take it for granted now that it won, but it was really tough, a bitter, hard struggle. And I thought if we could win on sport, and I remember something that Alan Paton, the great author, you'll be familiar with Cry the Beloved Country?
Absolutely. Great book.
And he was a friend of my mum and dad's. He was president of the Liberal Party, and we went to visit him when I was a kid at his house outside Durban. And he said to me, don't be an all or nothing person, Peter, be an all or something person. And by that he meant, and I'd kind of stuck in my brain as a little boy, try to do something tangible. And I've tried to apply that philosophy all through my life in politics, to do something tangible. And I thought we could stop the 1970 cricket tour, which is what we focused on. And then the Springbok rugby tour was just before it, in 69, 70, and we kind of used it as a dummy run. And there were demonstrations everywhere and lots of pitch invasions of that kind. And we stopped the cricket tour, for which I was not forgiven.
Well, it's true, but I remember all that stuff very well, and Basil D'Oliveira, who was a great hero of mine. But, I'm sort of curious on this. One of the things I'm trying to do these days is get young people to do sort of radical demonstration stuff. And it's great fun as we get them to do what I'd kind of like to do myself. What advice would you give to people today, you know, when you look around, of some sort of radical stuff that you'd like to be doing today? What do you see?
Well, I've already supported Extinction Rebellion. I think I was the only parliamentarian or one of the few to do it when they were sitting down outside Whitehall, because I think the climate crisis is so serious. It's existentially serious, a threat to the whole of humankind and the planet, that urgent action is needed, and I don't think the COP event in Glasgow is going to be anything like sufficient. And so I see their protests, and then they've, of course, been followed by even more militant Insulate Britain protests. Look, I'm worried about insulating Britain's endangering life by sitting down on motorways, but I understand why they're trying to do it. And it's very inconvenient. If I'm on a motorway and they stop me, I'm not going to be happy. But I kind of think it's got to be done.
And you were put on trial, weren't you?
Yeah, I was, yeah.
I mean, it was extraordinary, and it actually certainly does resonate for me, the mad English legal system. You guys probably think the English legal system is good. I would so much rather be on trial in Louisiana than London, I'll tell you. And reading your book really underlines that, because you were put on trial for conspiracy because you'd written a book slightly bragging about the things you're quite proud about, I'm sure, in terms of...
Well, I don't think bragging, but it was an
No,
account of the Stop the 72
but you were
campaign.
excited about it. You wanted to tell the world. And they put you on trial for that. But that must have been difficult. I mean, that's pretty
Well, it was a month-long conspiracy trial in the Old Bailey in June 1972, and my lawyers said to me, the judge is determined to send you to prison if you're convicted. And he then advised me, after the prosecution case had been finished, and I had a great QC, Michael Sherrard, who did the cross-examination of the prosecution's case, which was particularly weak, except for my self-confession as they presented it, of conspiracy. And such was the state of the law then that the particular offence, like, for example, trespass running on a rugby pitch or a cricket pitch, was not a criminal offence. It was a civil offence. The rugby or cricket authorities could have sued me had they chosen, but they couldn't have prosecuted me. But if you put conspiracy in front of it, an agreement to do something, in my case with others unknown, although most of them were known, to commit nearly 1,000 offences, the length of the British Isles, for which purposes Dublin was included, by the way, where the Springboks also played. So I was, in a sense, having to prove my innocence.
But then your lawyers wouldn't do your defence,
No,
they advised you to do it yourself.
They did, yeah, which was pretty kind of...
Very strange English system.
Well, basically they said, if we represent you on the defence case, we're going to be asked by the judge, what is your client's defence in law? And they basically said, there isn't one.
Whereas in America, we'd say, my client's defence in law is he's not guilty, which is perfectly reasonable. Yeah. I think that's extraordinary aspect.
So basically they said, you're not a lawyer, you can't answer that question, so he can't ask you that question.
But you've got to represent yourself.
But I represent myself.
Extraordinary.
But they said, if you appeal to the jury in representing yourself, making an open statement, examining the witnesses in the closing statement, and don't go into the dock because you'll convict yourself, which I didn't, much to the distress of the judge and the prosecutors. So that's what I did, and in the end, it was successful because they couldn't get a majority to convict me. They couldn't get a majority to acquit me either. So they convicted me on that incident. So after a month-long Old Bailey trial, I was fined £200 for sitting on a tennis court peacefully for a couple of minutes. The bigger charges, there was a hung verdict in the jury, and I was acquitted because the prosecution said they wouldn't go for a retrial.
Do you know, I want to give you an excuse to show another picture, actually. Pull that one up of Mandela. Because one of the things that you'll enjoy about Peter's book are the stories he tells about different people. And one of my favourites, I got to say, was Mandela meeting the Queen and referring to her as Elizabeth. And when confronted by people, that's not appropriate, he says, well, she called me Nelson. I thought that was a lovely story.
Yeah, it was on his 90th birthday, because he got on very well with her.
Yeah.
And visited the palace and stayed on a state visit and so on. And she telephoned him during his 90th birthday. And the phone was passed to him in this rather raucous party. And he picked it up and said exactly, hello, Elizabeth, how's the Duke? And his wife then castigated him afterwards and said, you can't refer to Her Majesty as Elizabeth, to which he said innocently, but she calls me Nelson.
Yeah.
But there are lots of stories about him like that.
No, there are lots of those. And also, there are so many things we could talk about, but we're going to have to let these people talk in a second, which is always the fun bit, is what you want to ask Peter. We'll turn the lights up in a minute. But I did want to just ask you too...
By the way, that picture, briefly, was on the eve of the 1994 election, and in his final press conference the day before in Johannesburg, and I was a parliamentary observer. It's a wonderfully emotional experience seeing democracy sort of in play and apartheid exorcised. And I found myself on my own with him as he was kind of relaxing after, he's age 76 by then. And there was this massive press conference with about 300 journalists from across the world, and he'd presided over with amazing sort of skill and dexterity and humor. And he was just kind of cooling down, and I was shown in to have a chat with him. And I asked him how he was feeling, because he was going to win, and he said, I thought he'd be kind of up, bubbling with joy, and he said, I'm just feeling like I've got the whole world on my shoulders. It was a sort of moment where you could just feel that he felt such a heavy weight of responsibility, because the country could have gone back into civil war.
Well, and it does, your book makes very clear what a wonderful job he did, and he sounds like such an extraordinary guy, as contrasted to two presidents further on, where you had to use your parliamentary immunity to expose incredible corruption under Zuma.
Under President Zuma, I did that in the House of Lords. And I hope, some people say it helped bring about his downfall. Whether it did or not, I'm not entirely sure, but parliamentary privilege is something that we all speak in Parliament, whether in the Commons or the Lords, under privilege, is a precious right that was won, some centuries before. And I used it to expose Sir Philip Green's allegations of abuse against his staff, and on one other occasion. But you've got to do it very sparingly when you're doing it to expose something that cannot be exposed in any other way. But I had a deep-throat whistleblower inside the South African state who fed me the draft to the speeches, and I then revealed it all.
It is extraordinary, that whole thing is interesting, and you write about how, you were asked by the Labour leader of the time to go to the House of Lords, and that must be a conflict in you, because it's a mad institution, isn't it?
Yep, I mean, it was, and I record in the book, Ed Miliband said, would you go to the Lords? And I said, hang on, I mean, it was like a bolt from the blue. I said, hang on, I don't agree with the place.
Didn't you say I haven't paid my $3 million? You didn't say that.
No, funnily enough, I didn't, Clive.
No, right.
But so that was my reaction, to which his response was, that's where I want you to go, because if I become Prime Minister, I want to reform it. Yeah. Personally, I think it should be elected. I think it should be elected by proportional representation, so that it represents the whole of the country. And you could have perhaps 10% of experts there, of the kind there are now, because there are some incredible people there who've got a level of expertise that you don't get in the Commons. But I think it should be democratized myself.
It's strange, isn't it? There's only 3 out of 42 members of the Council of Europe that don't have a democratically elected second chamber.
Yeah.
And it's just mad. I mean, it's another thing the US Constitution would forbid outright.
Yeah, exactly.
Just absolutely crazy. But I hope in the next many years you'll get that changed. And perhaps we won't have 16 bishops or whatever it is. Totally crazy.
But to get it changed, you've got to, the House of Lords has got to vote itself
I know.
to change. Now, it did that once before under Tony Blair, when hundreds of hereditary peers were abolished. And, Tony Blair gets knocked a lot and over Iraq, as he should be. But I think that he did a lot of great things, and that was one of them.
Yeah. Well, there's lots of other things you mentioned of Iraq. I'd love to go off on that. But I think we want to turn it over to these guys. Can we have the lights up? Oh, what a relief. Okay, good. Well, what I'd like for you lot to do is to, ask lots of questions, chastise him for his choice of football club, whatever you like to do. Yes, here. Sorry, I'm just going to point. It's horribly rude, I realize.
Yes.
Can we turn these incredibly bright ones down a bit, if that's possible? Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you so much. That was an engrossing presentation, and I just wish there was more. But
there's so much more. You got to get the book.
Right. I would be very interested in some comments. It's a big question, I realize, but whither South Africa now? You've played a role in exposing the corruption in the Zuma administration. There are question marks now over the future of the majority party in South Africa. How do you see the situation evolving in the next few years?
Well, I think it's a moment of great peril for the country at the moment, and it's possible it could go bad. I'm still optimistic, because South Africa has things going for it that a lot of other countries don't. For a start, if you compare it with Zimbabwe, its neighbor, for example, and Mugabe completely betrayed the freedom struggle and the values of Nelson Mandela, as President Zuma did, by the way, too, and created a corrupt, despotic state. of one-party rule. South Africa has a very competitive party system of independent parties who are legitimate and able to organize, and the Democratic Alliance, for example, runs the Western Cape, and the ANC's just lost a whole lot of local elections and city elections. Now, that sort of thing doesn't happen in Zimbabwe, or when it does, the election's annulled, or the opposition's smashed. So you have an independent opposition, a vigorous independent opposition. You have something else that Zimbabwe doesn't have, an independent media that helped expose, was largely responsible for exposing the Zuma corruption, and it was shameless looting, said to cost the country probably a fifth of its GDP, both in the hundreds of billions of rand, 20 rand to the pound, that were looted, but also in lost economic output. So it's a very, very damaging episode. So it's left the economy in difficulty. So you've got an independent opposition, you've got an independent media, you've got an independent judiciary. The Constitutional Court, I mentioned who the Deputy Chief Justice was that my mum had helped in the early 60s on trial, which has actually put Zuma in jail for contempt of court earlier this year. Now, there are not many constitutions in the world that do that to their former presidents. So, and there are other factors, but those are the reasons why I'm still positive about the future. But what worries me is the economy was run so badly under Zuma, having been run very well under Nelson Mandela and Thabo Mbeki, his successor, who was ousted by Zuma, where they had good growth rates, falling unemployment, increased black opportunities in universities, and millions of houses built and electricity brought to people and water brought to people. That's all gone into reverse as the population continues to grow. There have been millions of immigrants from elsewhere in Africa, and also a continued movement of people from rural to urban areas, creating big squatter settlements, shanties around places like Cape Town. I don't know if any of you have been to Cape Town, which I think is the most wonderful city in the world. But, you know, if you land at Cape Town Airport, you have to travel past these shanty squatter settlements and just as soon as they rehouse people, more of them set up. So it's a perilous moment. The current president who ousted the Zuma favored successor, who was a former wife of his, Cyril Ramaphosa, is in the Mandela tradition. Mandela actually wanted Ramaphosa to take over from him rather than Mbeki, but that wasn't the party's view. So there's hope at that level, but there's still corrupt ministers, some of whom have had to resign, others of whom are still in place, and Ramaphosa can't get rid of them because he only won by 179 votes out of 5,000 in his party election to become president. So it's an uncertain moment. That's the short answer to a difficult question.
Okay.
With the recent elections, EFF, Julius Malema, he's taken up quite a few seats now. Do you see that as a problem in the future? Because he's not, I mean, we saw what he was like, or he was good friends with Zimbabwe's, whatever his name is, Mugabe.
Yeah, I detect a South African accent there.
Very much so.
Yeah. Julius Malema, for those of you who aren't as well informed, is the head of the Economic Freedom Fighters, the EFF, which presents itself as a voice of the poor and as a kind of populist force, a radical populist force. In fact, I think it's a reactionary populist force. He's deeply corrupt, as other leaders, and he's exploiting the voice of the poor. Do I see him ever gaining traction? He won local elections in the previous cycle as well, but didn't supplant the Democratic Alliance, which probably is the major force, though I think it's also got serious problems. The biggest problem, I think, about South African party politics is you might get, as you did see in these recent elections, a fragmentation of the opposition. Now, you see that in Zimbabwe and in other African countries, where you don't see one or two challenging parties that can actually knock out the ANC. And although I've been, throughout my adult life a supporter of the ANC, Mandela's party, it is going to die if it doesn't expunge corruption from its ranks, which, by the way, are from top to bottom. It's just like a cancer through the party and the system of government. And getting elected to office is often a motivation for that, is getting onto the gravy train. Mind you, there's a bit of that going on in Britain at the moment, isn't there, as well? So we can't be too kind of high and mighty about it. But I don't think the EFF is ever going to pose a force, even though Julius Malema's swagger is in the shadow of Mugabe.
Okay, over here. Two, just so you can share the mic.
Hello, thank you very much for your time, and also for a very interesting novel, which I haven't finished, but I have brought my Kindle for you to sign.
Oh, we're excited about his novels. We want him to come back next year, so I can
Is this
read
the
them.
Rhino Conspiracy, is it?
Pardon?
Which one was it? The novel?
The Pretoria Boy.
Oh, the Pretoria Boy.
The novel. Oh, no, he's written some thrillers. That's what he's
I'm
doing
writing
now.
at
I
the
want him
moment,
back
but-
for next year on those. Sorry,
Yeah.
carry on.
Good. Yeah, there is an opinion, and I think it's a credible opinion, and I'm not sure whether you've heard it, and that is that Mandela's release was very closely linked to the price of gold. And because South Africa's economy depended very much on that price, and once it fell to a certain level or certain threshold, the economy was considered not to be viable at that stage. And so his release, based on this opinion, was planned several years before he was actually released. And it's also rumored that there were several world leaders in on this, including Margaret Thatcher. So I'm not sure whether you're familiar with that, but just to go one step further, de Klerk then didn't just see the light and decide that he needed to release Nelson Mandela. He was part of this whole conspiracy. So in the light of that, and also what you said about de Klerk and his involvement in the brutalities and tortures, was it appropriate for him to share the Nobel Peace Prize?
Do you want to just, let's frame that. Do you believe all of that
I've
conspiracy?
not heard that theory before, to be perfectly frank, about the gold price. It sounds a bit too... I'm not really a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah. But it's an interesting question. Do you
it is
think
an
he should have
interesting
got half of the Nobel Prize or not?
Well, I think it was appropriate at the time. It was not sure in 1993, when he received it alongside Nelson Mandela, whether the transition really would occur. There was all this violence going on unleashed by the state. And it was a very kind of uncertain moment. And I think it was part of just cementing in the transition process, as was, by the way, ironically, South Africa's readmission to the Cricket World Cup in 1991, which was permitted, even though the transition hadn't happened. Apartheid rulers were still in power, and the negotiations were going on. Sport, having been used as a stick to beat apartheid, became a carrot for emerging from apartheid by showing the white population what they could get. And it was, interestingly, it relates back to your earlier question, Clive, on sport. Interestingly, in the referendum which de Klerk called in 1992, a year after the Cricket World Cup, a whites-only referendum to back him in negotiating with Mandela, he asked for a mandate, and he won it. And one of the key bits of propaganda that he used was footage from that Cricket World Cup to show what the white population, what they could have in the future if they supported him.
But don't worry, if you're into conspiracy things, he's got lots of stuff in the book about BOSS. Don't you love the fact that they call their security agency BOSS, and how they were interfering with the Liberal Party. But
And also
yes.
how they framed me for a bank theft I knew nothing
well,
about.
that was
but that's
another great
story.
one. We didn't get to go through your whole criminal history, Pete.
Thanks very much. Fascinating talk. What part did sanctions play in the downfall of apartheid?
A very important part. You may remember that under pressure from the Black Caucus in the US Congress, America imposed loan sanctions on South Africa for the first time, financial sanctions in the late 1980s, against President Reagan's wishes. Congress voted for that. And that was an important thing. But basically what was going on was Paris and Berlin and London and Washington were all saying, oh no, we're totally opposed to apartheid, and they signed resolutions in the United Nations saying how horrified they were with apartheid, but they were arming the South African state and trading with it, and so that was as underpinning it. And sanctions, sports sanctions, cultural sanctions, and also there were some arms sanctions as well, under Labour in Britain, but then lifted when the Conservatives came into power in 1970. And so even limited sanctions started to hit the economy as well, particularly those loan sanctions from the United States.
So what about anyone over here? We've just got time for one or two more questions.
Peter, you were Secretary of State for Wales, and Wales now seem to have become your adoptive country. But do you still feel South African, and do you still go back regularly to South Africa?
Well, since I stepped down as an MP in 2015 to go to the Lords, which is, I described some stories about that, which you may find amusing, including meeting a guy called Garter, King of Arms, who you have to meet to...
It was outrageous how much you had to pay for those ridiculous outfits.
But anyway, you'll see that all in the Pretoria Boy. I've been back to South Africa much more often than I have, for decades. And Elizabeth and I, who's sitting on the front row as well, next to Joanne, my sister, go back on holiday quite a lot if we can. And I love going back. So what do I feel? Well, I've spent most of my life in Wales, the largest part of my life in Wales, over 30 years, than I have anywhere else, including South Africa. So I'm a bit of South African, I'm a bit of British, and I'm a bit of Welsh, all mixed up together with allegiances in all those directions. If you ask me who I support in rugby, I support Wales. If Wales get knocked out, then my allegiances are a bit sort of pulled all over the place, but I have to confess, and this will probably get me drummed out of this audience, in the Rugby World Cup final in November 2019, I supported the Springboks.
But what about the cricket, a couple of weeks ago?
Oh, well, yeah, but...
no, come on, be honest. Who are you supporting?
Let's come back, just to say for a moment on the Springbok victory. I remember Dani Craven, who was the head of White South African Rugby at the time.
About him.
At the time, we were organising the demonstrations against the 1969 Springbok tour, and he said then, over my dead body will there ever be a black Springbok. So to see a black Springbok captain, Seo Kolisi, a boy from the townships, hoisting the World Cup, even at England's expense, and a multiracial team with black wingers and forwards scoring tribes, as well as whites. It was like the epitome of what we'd been campaigning for. And we're misunderstood because people said I was anti-rugby and anti-cricket and anti-sport and all that nonsense. I was anti-racism in sport.
Yeah. Well, I won't make you say, you'll probably say you wanted Chelsea to win the cricket the other day. So look, we're about out of time. I want to thank Peter very much for gracing, and his family for gracing Bridport. And I also want to thank the Bowdries for sponsoring this event, and thank you to all of you for coming. All right, let's give them a round of applause, eh?
Thank you very much.